I'm going to walk you through what I think is the best way to do that. Obviously, there's people out there that are going to tell you millions of different ways, and people that will tell you machining it is the best, and tell you hand cutting all this stuff is the best. But I'm going to show you the basic introductory way to file, grind, fit up, and weld out a horizontal piece of pipe.
Excellent. And this is all stuff that a person can go to the Georgia Trade School and learn, correct?
Yes, we teach all this stuff at Georgia Trade School. So.
Cool. Yeah, so Steven's a great instructor. I've known him for some time now. I really think you guys are going to like him, and it's an honor to have you here on the channel today. So yeah, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's learn how to do this.
Sweet. So the first thing I want to do after I've got my bevel on, again, if a landing has not been machined on or prepped for you, the best way to do it, some old school guys will tell you, just fit it up with a grinder. Other guys will tell you, just file it from a point all the way down. But what I think is the fastest and most efficient way for people who are just starting out is to grind yourself a little landing even all the way around. Then you want to take your file after you grind. You have to take the burrs off the back side, which are on the inside of this pipe. So a lot of people will grind and then they say, yeah, I've got my 1/8 landing, right? Which on a side note, your landing needs to be between 3/32 and 1/8, give or take, depending on how you like to run it. But you want to take your file after you grind around the surface of it, right? And the metal's going to lay over on the inside. So what you want to do is you want to take the rounded side of your file and you want to deburr it. And as you deburr it, you're going to get a true landing size. So you could have a 1/8 landing after you grind. If you don't deburr it, when you go to weld it, your landing sizes could be under 3/32. So, and of course, people always ask me, well, does 1/32 of an inch really matter? Well, when you go to school or get in the field or anything like that, you know, you have to be comfortable with tacking, welding. You're using rods that are 1/8, you're using rods that are 3/32, so you need to be comfortable with working, you know, and being proficient within 1/32 of an inch. So yes, it does matter essentially. So I'm just going to show you how I take the grinder and kind of round it around on some sides. I won't do it as much, you'll see, because you can't see right now, but I've got an 1/8 over here and I've got about a 1/16 right here. So I'm going to probably favor this side a little bit, which will drop it a little lower. So I'm still going to give everything an even amount of love, but just show you how to do it. So, we did already have a landing machined on here, so I didn't have to do much. And obviously you don't ever want to do this with a new disc, or you want to kind of bear down heavy on it. I know that sounds funny, because what happens is with the new discs, and also if you don't bear down heavy enough, you'll see what I've got here. I've got a bunch of high-lows. So, luckily that's what your file is for. So after you do that, you can go ahead and deburr it, or you can wait. Or you take your file, preferably with gloves on, you take the rounded side and you want to go back and forth on. And this process takes a very long time, and as I teach my students, this is the most aggravating part, but this is the most important part, because if you decide to rush this and you have highs and lows, or 1/8 or 3/32, what happens is when you go to put that root in at 95 amps, you're going to blow the landing out, you're going to keyhole a big spot, and 1/4 inch pipe, or Schedule 40 is around a 1/4 inch, so we're not talking 3/4 of an inch or 1 inch steel, so every inch counts. So. And I'll show you how we take that landing out. Essentially, you're going to do this process over and over and over and over again until you get your perfect fit up for both pieces. And here in just a minute, I'll show you how we put these two pieces together and get a nice tight fit. So. So now that I've ground my landing, I've filed, I've deburred the backside, I'm going to show you guys how, after you do that with two pieces, how to fit them up, find your highs and lows, and how to get the best fit, and then obviously put a 1/8 spacing in there. And I just want to talk about that for a second. I don't know if I mentioned that. Ideally, your ranges, it's entirely up to you as far as landing and opening root gap. But what I tell my students is, you have to think if you decide to do no landing, it's not going to weld. The landing on pipe, on plate, on anything open groove, what it serves the purpose as, it serves for the weld to have something to sit on and not blow completely through it. Because once you take two pieces of metal and put an opening in them, essentially you've reduced that metal to, no matter what size the thickness is to no thickness. So this 1/8 or 3/32 to 1/8 landing that we're working with essentially is holding all of our heat into the metal. So I'm going to show you guys how to fit this up and get tacked out with 4 tacks, and we'll walk through that in just a minute. The purpose that the bevel serves, and usually what we cut here at Georgia Trade School, or what I had Lance do for us, is around 35 to 37.5. That's pretty typical for most Schedule 40 pipe. Obviously, the steeper your landing is, you have to look at it like the pitch of a roof. If you have a super steep roof, how harder is that to climb? And well, in the welding world, if you have a steeper bevel, you put 2 of those steep pieces together, how much harder is it to fill up that weld with? So if we have a narrower, we have less weld, that's less time, it's more productive, it's more efficient. So the landing essentially just serves as you're opening this piece of pipe up, and you are putting welds in it, penetrating the root, putting a hot pass in after that, putting a 3-stringer cap. And obviously, with pipe sizes, as you get into Schedule 80 and double wall and heavy wall and things like that, the amount of prep and the amount of welding time required obviously goes up in time. So the landing, again, like I said earlier, it's just serving the purpose of allowing us to, as we take a rod, and say for instance, this is a 3/32, but if you had a 1/8 rod, 60-10, we want that weld to be able to penetrate and sit onto the landing with minimal push through, right? And I say minimal very haphazardly. You definitely want to push through, but you don't want to blow through. So all that landing serves is, it's the purpose of having this rod. If this piece of pipe was at a point, this landing, if it was at a point, then the rod would blow through, but having the landing there serves as our weld sits on there, completely penetrates the joint, and then we can start to work on some intermediate passes and capping it out. So
you're saying it's basically just a little flat spot where the weld sits, and having the flat on there works to absorb heat, because if it was just a knife edge, like 2 bevels meeting, there's not really enough material there to absorb it. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. Well, you have to think, when you're running a 60-10 root rod at 95 or 105 amps, on a knife's edge, it's not going to work out. Even if you're traveling downhill against that heat, not pushing it up, or with the heat, you need to have the landing so that your rod does not blow through your material and it has a place to absorb the heat. So I want to talk about real quick, sometimes you run into, if you grind your landing too hard, and you have a fat landing, maybe you have it over 1/8, close to 5/32, let's just say it's big. What you can do is, with not the rounded side, with the flat side, you come up on the landing, because this file obviously is serrated for one direction only. This is all directions. So if your landing is too big, you take the flat side, and what you're doing is you're increasing the bevel angle, and that's minimizing the size of the landing. So again, you take this file, you come up on the bevel angle, obviously on the face of the bevel, and that decreases the size of the landing. So if you want a larger landing, file more or grind more. If you want a smaller landing, increase your bevel angle with the file. So the first thing I want to do after I get each of my pipes prepped, ground down to 1/8 landing, I want to put my hand on top on a flat surface, preferably a level fabrication table or a table that doesn't get welded and ground on. You want to take your hand and you want to wobble it and feel for the highs and lows. Essentially what you're doing is you're checking to see how much more you need to file it down. The tighter the fit, the better. Because what's going to happen is we're going to place a 1/8 rod in between this for a spacing, and then we're going to find our highs and lows and correlate them. If we have a low spot, we want to put a high spot over it. Or sorry, if we have a low spot, we want to put, yes, a higher spot on the correlating pipe down on there. And I know that sounds confusing, but we'll explain it all. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to feel for wobble in these pipes on side to side. And once I get them all nice and fit up, I want to take my other piece of pipe, I want to place it on top of it. And essentially what you're doing here now is you're rotating these pipes till you get a nice tight fit all the way around. So I'm rotating, I'm looking for highs, I'm looking for lows, and then obviously I'm shifting this pipe to find it. So once you get your good fit up, what you want to do is you want to take a silver streak or a Sharpie, and you want to put a nice little arrow there, and then an arrow on the bottom side as well. And all that that's doing is, when I take these pieces and I throw them around and I find my stand and I finally hook my machine up, I don't lose my perfect fit. So all the arrows are serving as a guide, so that way when I'm ready to weld out, I know, instead of putting the pipe like this, now I know my perfect fit is where these arrows line up. So I want to talk about the spacing rod. Again, your tolerances are between 3/32 and 1/8. I prefer 1/8. 1/8 landing, 1/8 gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a standard Excalibur 7018 1/8 rod, and I'm going to beat the flux off of it and scrape all of it down, because I know that with a 1/8 rod, obviously, I need about 14 inches to gap this pipe out, and I'll show you exactly how I do that. All right, now I'm going to take it and right here. So, all right, so now that I've beat the flux completely off the rod, all that I'm going to do is I'm going to move this back and forth to remove the remaining flux. You know, take your time on this because you don't want highs and lows with the flux on there. And once I do that, you should be able to scrape the rest off with your hands. And now you have your 1/8 spacing rod. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this rod at the midway point and I'm going to bend it, and that's just to give you a reference on how you want to do this. So once I've got it bent to an even length, okay, that's how I'm going to space my pipe. So now that I've got my landings done, I've got my bevels done, I've found my highs and lows, and I've marked the spots accordingly. The last step right before we weld is I'm going to put that spacing rod in between. I'm going to find my arrows, I'm going to line it up, and now the last and final step right before I weld out is I want to feel on the inside of this pipe to make sure that everything is lined up. So all I'm doing is I'm taking my index finger with no glove on, and I'm feeling for a smooth finish from the bottom piece of pipe all the way up to the top piece. In other words, if I have the pipe cocked to the left a little bit, on the left hand side I'll be able to feel that on the right hand side. So all I'm feeling for is a nice, perfect sandwich fit. And this is what I tell my students all the time. This is the longest part. Weld out gets done in a matter of minutes. You want to take your time on this in order to become a better welder, in order to be a good pipe welder. You want to notice your mistakes and rectify them every time you do it. So I'm feeling for a nice tight fit. I've got a nice tight 1/8 landing and a nice tight 1/8 gap. And now we will tack. In order for this pipe not to draw and close up our gap, we have to tack it appropriately. So what we're going to do is we're going to tack this thing, and then we're going to weld it out much like you take a lugs off a tire. So we're going to put a tack in here at 6 o'clock, another one here at 12, another one here at 3, and another one here at 9. And as we weld that out, we have it tacked on all 4 corners per se on this pipe, with an even distance on each side, so that way as we weld one side out, it's not going to close a gap up or push another or open up another side. So after we put our tacks in, I'm going to show you guys, after you terminate a weld, you have a keyhole, and most of you guys, if you're watching this video, are familiar with what a keyhole looks like. So I will show you how to feather and cut a keyhole into the opposite side, which does not have a keyhole where you started your weld at. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get eye level with this bevel, okay? So, comfortably sitting. Now, your tack should be around 3/8 to half an inch, give or take. This is only 1/4 inch metal schedule 40, so you don't need to put a big honking 1 inch tack in there. The main thing that you want to do though with pipe, because this pipe is so thin, any adjustment in rod angle is going to favor or overfill another side. Underfill or overfill rather. So when you strike this arc, you want to come directly in, straight, push all the way through, listen for that roar, and then whip out at the end. So, ready? So, put our tack in at 6 o'clock. Now we're going to rotate the pipe and put it in at 12. What I do here now, as I've got that spacer in, what a lot of people run into is if on their first time they put all 4 tacks in with the spacer in, it's almost impossible to get that sucker out. You've got, 12 inches worth of pipe getting sucked down on a metal rod. It's a recipe for disaster. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to move this rod to the side and maybe have one end of it sticking in crossways. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to keep my cross-sectional gap just like that. It's going to allow me to have my cross-sectional gap where I have no tacks nice and tight. And as I put my tack in at 12, it's going to allow even pressure along the whole joint. So again, I'm going to get eye level with this bevel, make sure my gaps are all nice and tight, kind of double checking, glancing over everything, feeling one last time on that seam, and then I'm going to put my tack in. So I just want to point out, this is a huge thing that I teach my students, especially when you go test for a place that does pipe welding. What they want to see is that you can keep that arc contained to the bevel, which, that's not even close to half an inch, so that's pretty tight. But as you strike your arc, you want to strike, get that arc burning, push through, listen for that roar, and whip out inside the bevel. What you don't want to do, you don't want to arc off all on the outside. So as you'll see, I have no arc marks on the outside of the pipe. Spatter is okay, obviously, because that can be reduced. But you do not want to deposit metal on the outside of the bevel. When you test for a pipe company, they want to see nice, clean, just affected area of the weld. Like I said, we put our tacks in at 6 and 12. And this rod is going to get pretty tight. If you've done your prep correctly, you really want it to pinch down on there. You don't want it to pull out easily, because what that says is I'm hitting a low spot on the pipe, and now my gap is larger than 1/8. So the way that I get it out is I will bend and break one side off, then I will take a chipping hammer and I will hit that side through, and I'll do the same thing on the other side. So I'll take it and I'll bend the rod if it won't just slide right out, but in this case this sucker's sliding out, so that's good. But if I didn't, I would take the rod and just kind of move it back and forth, and eventually you'll find a nice little spot in there and it'll break out. But I'm going to show you how I break this out if you get stuck. In other words, you pretty much just have to be brute on it and get it out of there just like that. So essentially you're just wiggling the rod back and forth. You'll see a lot of guys beating the crap out of it with a hammer. And the only reason you don't want to do that is you don't want to damage your landing at all. You've taken so much time to prep, file, and grind this landing out and tack it nice and tight within a 32nd of an inch. You don't want to take a hammer and just beat the hell out of it. So now we're going to put our tacks in at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And I've said 4 or 5 times, don't rush this part because you're going to pay for it when you go to weld it out. Now that I've got my 3 in, I'm going to put my final tack in down here at 9 o'clock. So what I'm showing in the camera is showing I've got my tacks, one side's keyholed, and I'm showing you if you take your time, you fit up your landing, you should have a nice 1/8 even gap all the way around. And trust me, if you've done this before, you know that taking your time on this really pays off when you go to weld it out. All right, guys, so you're gonna see some pictures in this video of a close-up of this tack. As I said, one side's keyholed, one side's not. The reason why you need both sides keyholed, and again, some of the old schoolers will tell you don't need to do this, but for the sake of learning, you wanna be able to tie into your root. So essentially, these tacks are a part of your root. So what's gonna happen is, at our travel speed, when I put my rod in, I'm gonna come in to start and I'm gonna wanna tie into this keyhole, okay? Now, without a cut on the other side of this keyhole, I'm pretty much relying on heat and penetration to tie into that. Well, any pipe test that I've ever taken, and per Elaine Waters that taught me at Georgia Trade School, what you wanna do is, you want to tie into the other side as well, and you're able to use a grinder to do that. So don't look at this video as like, oh, well, they have grinders, they have this equipment. All of this equipment is going to be available to you as you take a test. You are not just going to be stuck with a wire wheel, or sorry, with a wire brush and a chipping hammer. You're going to be able to feather your tacks and grind things out. So I'm going to show you how I take a cut disc and I just feather this tack down a little bit and I cut a nice keyhole in the other side so I can tie in. All I've done here is I've feathered this tack down a little bit. I've put another keyhole in the other side, so that way each side is essentially the same. I want to tie into my root, and some people consume the tack, meaning they burn out and blow through it, but for this video we're just going to show you how to tie in. I mentioned a lot of times when you take a pipe test, where it tacks is where it stays. You're allowed to use a grinder and a wire wheel and all that jazz, but where it tacks is where it stays. So I want to talk to you about the rate of travel, maybe some positioning, and also how to actually physically run this route.